In the shadowed halls of Constantinople, where whispers carry more weight than swords, and a smile can hide a dagger, there lived a truth that would cost a man everything he held dear. The friend who knows your secrets holds your destruction in his hands, while the enemy who shows his blade offers you the gift of clarity. The year was 1143, and the Byzantine Empire stood at the crossroads of triumph and treachery. Within the marble corridors of the great palace, where purple silk rustled with the movements of those who ruled half the known world, a drama was unfolding that would forever change how men understood loyalty and alliance. Nikephoros Komnenos stood before the great window of his chamber, watching the morning light dance across the waters of the Golden Horn. At 38, he had risen higher than any man. Born outside the imperial bloodline, had dared to dream. As the emperor's chief administrator, he controlled the empire's vast network of trade routes, diplomatic missions, and spy operations. His word could lift a province to prosperity or doom it to ruin. Yet on this morning, as the first light touched the dome of Hagia Sophia, Nikephoros felt a shadow creeping across his soul, a feeling that the very foundations of his carefully built world were about to crumble. His rise to power had not come through noble birth or inherited wealth. Nikephoros was the son of a minor clerk from Trebizond, a man whose greatest achievement had been keeping accurate records of grain shipments. But the younger Komnenos possessed something far more valuable than royal blood. A mind that could see patterns where others saw only chaos, and a gift for making the right allies at exactly the right moment. Chief among these allies had been Ioannis Kantakouzenos, his closest friend since their shared youth as clerks in the imperial bureaucracy. Together, they had navigated the dangerous waters of court politics, each protecting the other's back as they climbed the slippery ladder of Byzantine power. When Nikephoros had been appointed to his current position, he had immediately elevated Ioannis to serve as his deputy, sharing with him not only the privileges of high office, but also the most closely guarded secrets of the empire. But power, like wine, reveals the true nature of those who taste it deeply. The first sign of trouble had come 3 weeks earlier, when a routine intelligence report from the eastern provinces had failed to arrive on schedule. Such delays were not uncommon, but Nikephoros had learned long ago that in the world of imperial politics, even the smallest problem could signal approaching disaster. When he had asked about the missing report, Ioannis had assured him that it was merely a problem with the courier routes, nothing more. The second sign had been subtle, a shift in the way certain court officials looked at him during imperial audiences. Where once he had seen respect and perhaps a touch of fear, now he detected something else. The calculating gaze of men, measuring a rival's weakness. It was the look that came before a political execution in Byzantium, as familiar and deadly as the advance of plague. But it was the third sign that had truly shaken him to his core. 2 days ago, while reviewing financial documents in his private study, Nikephoros had discovered that someone with access to his personal seal had authorized the transfer of huge amounts of money to accounts controlled by the Duca's family, his most bitter rivals in the endless game of court intrigue. The Duca's clan had been his enemies for over a decade, ever since their failed attempt to destroy his reputation during the Persian trade negotiations. They were a proud and ancient family who viewed Nikephoros as an upstart whose common origins made him unfit for high office. More importantly, they were smart enough to know that his position as chief administrator made him the single greatest obstacle to their own ambitions. As Nikephoros stood at his window, watching the city slowly wake beneath the rising sun, he found himself thinking about a question that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Which of his inner circle had betrayed him? The answer, when it came, would prove more devastating than any military defeat. A soft knock at his chamber door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Enter," he called, turning from the window as Ioannis stepped into the room. His oldest friend wore the expression of a man bearing terrible news, his usually calm features marked by lines of apparent concern. "My lord," Ioannis began, his voice carrying the weight of shared sorrow, "I bring troubling intelligence from our networks in the eastern provinces." Nikephoros gestured for him to continue, noting with a sharp attention that had served him well in court that his friend's hands showed the slight tremor that always came with deception. It was a detail he had observed countless times over the years, when Ioannis was forced to lie to their superiors to protect some minor mistake. Never before had that tremor been directed at him. "The Persian merchants we have been negotiating with have withdrawn their offers," Ioannis continued, his eyes not quite meeting Nikephoros' gaze. "Worse, they have entered into exclusive agreements with other parties." The irony was so perfect, so beautifully crafted, that Nikephoros almost admired the artistry of it. Here was his closest friend and most trusted ally, reporting on his own betrayal with the sorrowful manner of a loyal servant bearing unwelcome news. It was a performance worthy of the greatest actors who entertained the court, complete with seemingly genuine emotion and carefully controlled outrage. But Nikephoros had not survived 2 decades in Byzantine politics by accepting surface appearances. His mind began working through the puzzle with a cold precision that had made him one of the most feared men in the empire. Who else had possessed detailed knowledge of the Persian negotiations? The circle had been deliberately kept small: himself, Ioannis, and perhaps 3 other officials whose loyalty had been tested in previous crises. That left only one suspect, and he was standing in this very room, his face a masterpiece of false concern and manufactured loyalty. "This is indeed grave news," Nikephoros said finally, his voice betraying none of the cold fury that was building in his chest. "We must investigate this betrayal thoroughly. I trust no one more than you to oversee such an investigation, my friend." Something flickered in Ioannis' eyes, surprise perhaps, or the first stirring of real fear. He had expected anger, accusations, perhaps even immediate arrest. Instead, he found himself tasked with investigating his own treachery, a position that was both perfectly safe and utterly dangerous. That evening, as shadows gathered in the corners of the great palace, Nikephoros made his way through passages that few courtiers knew existed. His destination was a chamber deep within the palace's oldest section, a room that appeared on no official maps and whose existence was known only to those who traded in the empire's most dangerous commodity: information. Waiting for him in the chamber's single chair sat a figure that most courtiers would have recognized, but few would have dared to approach. Theodoros Laskaris, head of the empire's intelligence networks, and, by necessity, if not by choice, Nikephoros' most dangerous enemy. Their rivalry had begun years earlier over a matter so trivial that neither man could likely remember its exact details. What mattered was that it had escalated through a series of bureaucratic battles, strategic moves, and carefully orchestrated humiliations until it had become one of the court's defining feuds. Yet here, in this forgotten chamber, they sat across from each other like old friends planning a pleasant evening's entertainment. "You look," Theodoros observed with what might have been amusement. Like a man who has just discovered that his most trusted ally has been selling his secrets to his enemies. "And you look," Nikephoros replied, settling into the chamber's second chair. "Like a man who has been watching such a betrayal unfold for weeks, without bothering to warn its victim." The negotiation that followed was conducted in the careful, formal language that Byzantine diplomats used when discussing matters of life and death. What emerged from their conversation was an understanding that would have seemed impossible to any observer familiar with their history of mutual hatred. "Your friend Ioannis," Theodoros said, as their negotiation neared its conclusion, "has been meeting with Constantine Dukas every Tuesday evening for the past 2 months. They intend to present the emperor with evidence of your alleged embezzlement from the imperial treasury, evidence that they have been carefully fabricating for weeks." "I assume," Nikephoros said carefully, "that you have a proposal for how this unfortunate situation might be redirected." Theodoros smiled, and for the first time in their long acquaintance, there was genuine warmth in the expression. "Indeed I do. But it will require you to trust me completely, despite our history. Can you do that?" "No," Nikephoros replied immediately. "I cannot trust you at all. But I can trust that your self-interest aligns with mine in this matter, and that is infinitely more valuable than trust. Then we understand each other perfectly." The crucial moment came 5 days later, during the weekly meeting of the Imperial Council. The great chamber was filled with the most powerful men in the empire, their purple-trimmed robes rustling as they took their places around the massive table that had witnessed centuries of momentous decisions. At the head of the table sat Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, a man whose intelligence and ruthlessness had made him one of Byzantium's greatest rulers. Several of the men around that table knew that this would be the day of Nikephoros' downfall. They watched him with the predatory attention of scavengers gathering around a dying animal, their faces carefully composed to hide their anticipation. "Your Majesty," Nikephoros said finally, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly tense chamber, "before I present my report, I must address a matter of the gravest importance to the security of the empire." He reached into his robes and withdrew a leather portfolio bound with red silk cord. "Over the past weeks, I have discovered evidence of a conspiracy against the imperial government. A conspiracy that involves the theft of state secrets, the betrayal of diplomatic negotiations, and the systematic embezzlement of funds from the imperial treasury." The reaction around the table was immediate and electric. But it was Ioannis whose reaction was most telling. His face went completely white, and his hands gripped the edge of the table with enough force to make his knuckles stand out like pale stones. "The proof exists, Your Majesty," came a voice from the chamber's entrance. All heads turned to see Theodoros Lascaris entering with a small escort of palace guards. In his hands, he carried a wooden chest bound with iron straps. What followed was a methodical destruction of the conspiracy that had been aimed at Nikephoros. Document by document, letter by letter, Theodoros laid out a case that was so comprehensive and damning that even the accused could offer little in their defense. The most devastating moment came when Theodoros produced a letter written in Ioannis' own hand, addressed to Constantine Dukas and containing a detailed plan for framing Nikephoros for embezzlement. Ioannis, faced with evidence of his own treachery written in his own words, finally abandoned all pretense of innocence. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain." "You can be silent," the emperor cut him off. I have heard enough. The trials that followed were swift and decisive. Constantine Ducas and his co-conspirators were stripped of their positions and exiled to remote provinces. As for Ioannis, the man who had been Nikephoros' closest friend and most trusted ally, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in a monastery, where he would have ample time to contemplate the true nature of loyalty and friendship. In the aftermath of the conspiracy's exposure, Nikephoros found his position stronger than ever. But more importantly, he had gained something far more valuable than imperial favor: a partner who understood the true nature of power and alliance. The partnership between Nikephoros and Theodoros became one of the most formidable forces in Byzantine politics. Two men who had once been bitter enemies now worked together with an efficiency that amazed their colleagues and terrified their remaining rivals. Their success was built on a foundation that proved far more durable than friendship: mutual necessity and honest recognition of each other's capabilities and limitations. Years later, when young administrators would ask Nikephoros for advice on navigating the treacherous waters of imperial politics, he would tell them about the night when his greatest enemy had saved him from his closest friend. Trust, he would say, is not something to be given freely, like water poured from a pitcher. It is a tool to be used wisely, placed in the hands of those whose success depends on your own. A man who needs you to succeed will serve you far better than one who loves you, but profits from your failure.